Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the European Commission press room. We have the chief negotiation of the Article 15 negotiations with us. I'd like to give him the floor directly. You have the floor, Mr. Barnier. Yes, good morning to everybody. And thank you very much for your close attention today and over the last few months. I'm very happy to see you again for this brief press briefing after I took part in the meeting of the College of Commissioners today, where we talked about the negotiating guidelines. We submitted the draft negotiating guidelines to be submitted to the Council on one of the aspects of these extraordinary and complex negotiations, which is the transition period. We reached a first agreement last Friday, and I said then that work would have to continue. And this morning, the Commission adopted this recommendation that we presented on the negotiating guidelines for a transition period. And the 3 points that I would like to make on this. So first of all, I'd like to say that the sufficient progress that President Juncker and everybody recognised was a very important step, a necessary step on the way to an agreement, an orderly withdrawal of the UK from the European Union. We're not at the end of the process, but it is an important step on this path towards an orderly withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union, an orderly withdrawal rather than a disorderly one. And I'd like once again to congratulate all concerned on the work that was done. I did this, I thanked Theresa May and the negotiating team, the British negotiating team in the European Parliament when I addressed them the other day. So an important step forward has been taken, but we're not at the end of the road. We need time to establish an orderly withdrawal. And as stipulated by the European Council in April, we need this transition period that was actually officially requested by Theresa May at the speech that she made in Florence for the first time. The transition period is useful, and it will enable the administration in Britain, the public administration in Britain, to get prepared, to prepare themselves for the kind of challenges that they will have to face at their borders, which are also our borders, and to prepare also for the complications of and also prepare for the new relationship. And that's why this transition period, as requested by the United Kingdom, is indeed useful and is part of an orderly withdrawal from the European Union. I'd like to talk now about the underpinning principles of this of negotiations for these for this transition period. This is nothing new. They're in the European Council guidelines as well. Any transition period would have to respect these principles and safeguard these principles as set out by the European Council in April and by the European Parliament in its resolutions. There are 5 that I'd like to refer to. The integrity of the single market. Any transition would have to cover all of the economic sectors that are covered by the single market. And the 4 freedoms would, of course, remain indivisible. They are the foundation of the single market, after all. Secondly, the integrity of the customs union. The common customs tariff is a key aspect of the customs union and would still apply during the transition period, as indeed would border inspections on products from third countries. The third point, the third principle, is that all of the new rules adopted by the European Union during the transition period would apply to the United Kingdom and be subject to the European agencies, the European Commission, the Court of Justice as well, the European Union Court of Justice. The fourth principle is that this cannot be an a la carte transition period. The EU regulatory framework and all EU policies will still apply. The fifth principle is that the EU's autonomy of decision-making would still apply. The United Kingdom would become a third country on the morning of the 30th of March 2018 and will no longer therefore be part of the institutions of the European Union. So this means that during the transition period, the United Kingdom will keep all of the benefits, all of the advantages, but also all of the obligations and duties of the single market, the customs union, and our common policies. This transition period will meet the concerns, answer to some extent the concerns of business. They've told us that they need stability. They need stability during the transition period. Continuity, therefore, a continuity of the existing regulatory framework. And also that over and above this continuity and stability, they don't want to have to adapt twice. So keep the whole of the regulatory framework in place, for business in particular, means that they only need to adapt once at the end of the transition period. Of course, they need to start preparing for this right now. Another important point, which is also in the European Council decisions, relates to the duration of the transition period. It should be of a short and specific duration. At Florence, Theresa May, in her speech, referred to a maximum of 2 years. Our position, the European Commission's position, is that this would run logically to the 31st of December 2020, because that's also the end of, that was the duration of the current multi-annual financial framework. Now you might be wondering when we'll actually adopt the transition period and decide on the duration and the details of the transition period, because of course we're aware of the fact that a lot of citizens, businesses, companies, universities, public administrations want clarity as soon as possible. But the legal base of this, and the only legal base of the transition period, is Article 50. Let me just remind you of that. And if we don't have an orderly withdrawal under Article 50, then there won't be a transition period. So these two things go hand in hand. Everything to do with the withdrawal, on the basis of the joint report that was approved a week ago, which will be at the core of the withdrawal agreement, and the transition period, which will be decided upon on the same legal basis. So the transition period is part of the withdrawal agreement. We have to finalise the content by October 2018 in the Article 50 treaty, in the new Article 50 treaty. Because also we need to give the European Parliament and the Council and the British authorities, the British Parliament, we need to give them time to take a position on this agreement. So the transition and finalising the withdrawal agreement go hand in hand, as I said. This orderly withdrawal based on paragraph 96 of the joint report, we will not be moving backwards on any of the points or reopening any of the points that were subject to the stipulation of sufficient progress in the European Council. Obviously, we'll be looking at our future relationship with the United Kingdom from March, after the European Council, which will adopt new guidelines. We'll be deciding on a new, very important document that needs to be finalised by October 2018, parallel to the Article 50 Treaty, a political document which would accompany the withdrawal agreement and should clearly stipulate and outline the shape of our future relationship. I was at the European Parliament. I also went to the European Council at President Tusk's invitation, and the heads of state and government of the 27 member states want to know clearly in October what the direction is that we're taking, what the shape of our future relationship with the United Kingdom will be. In the political declaration, we need to define the framework of the future relationship. We'll need more time, of course, for more details. And that will be a parallel document to the Article 50 Treaty on the ordered withdrawal from the European Union and the transition period. So when the transition period starts, we'll know exactly what the transition is a transition towards. So just to be absolutely clear on this, the framework of the future relationship, of course, this will be scrupulously in line with the guidelines from the European Council, but we do know what we're going towards, what we're moving towards already, because we know the various types of partnerships that we have with other third countries. I've illustrated this on slides that have been relatively widely disseminated. And we would then, when it comes to deciding the basis of the future relationship and the framework of the future relationship, the factor that would decide the nature of the future relationship is the red lines expressed by the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom said themselves that they don't want to be in the single market because they don't want to respect the four freedoms. The United Kingdom itself, through its government, is saying that they don't want to be part of the customs union because they want sovereignty to make trade policy and trade policy agreements themselves. So that's not something that we're imposing on them. That's something that the United Kingdom has said itself. They've said that they won't recognise, for example, the authority of the European Court of Justice. So taking into account what the United Kingdom has said to us, what their position is, that has consequences, of course, on them and on us. So looking at the different cooperation models that we have with third countries, and these are all available, all of these different models strike a balance between benefits and obligations, and cross-checking that with the United Kingdom's red lines, own red lines, then logically, for the economic side of our partnership, we'll be working on the basis of a free trade agreement. Along the same lines as what we negotiated and signed most recently with Canada, also South Korea, and Japan, even more recently. And to be absolutely crystal clear here, no ambiguity at all. There are, of course, differences between these different models, because each of these cooperation models, each of these trade models is, of course, tailor-made and specific for the country with which we're signing these agreements. So there are differences, but it's the same approach, the same logic underpinning these agreements. And that will be the situation with the United Kingdom in the light of what they have said their position is themselves. And of course, it's not only about trade. We're not only trading with the United Kingdom. We won't only be trading with the United Kingdom. There are other dimensions to the future partnership, which we'll be working on from March. Judicial cooperation, for example. Aviation, a specific agreement on aviation. Also, bilateral cooperation in what is such a very sensitive area as far as our citizens in particular are concerned, which of course is security and defence and foreign affairs. And as I said in Berlin, that won't be done under the Treaty of the European Union because of course the UK is leaving that, but it will be done according to a different agreement or treaty. The economic side will be a free trade agreement. So 5 days after the European Council recognised that sufficient progress had been made, and the European Parliament as well recognised that, 5 days afterwards, we'll be submitting the negotiating guidelines to the Council. I'll be doing that myself to co-repair this afternoon, and the General Affairs Council is due to discuss this on the 29th of January. And then immediately after that, we'll begin negotiations on the future transition period. And just a few words in English